I was having emotional affairs left and right. It led to the point where he confronted me, and I said, I won't do it again. And I did it again, and he found out again, and then he confronted me and said, you need to leave. And I was gone for 5 years.
In those 5 years, I had to deal with abandonment and anger and loss, and dreams totally crashed. And then I had to become okay if that was going to be the outcome of it.
In all of the good times and even the trials, through tears and through laughter, yeah, I know that I'll smile when I think of you. Smile for the things you do. Smile, God gave me you. You are the reason I smile. Yeah.
This is Behind Our Smiles.
Pursuing connection
And finding joy.
even in the struggle.
And welcome back to another episode of the Behind Our Smiles podcast. We are Joe and Tara Buchanan, and we're so glad that you're here.
And today is a special episode because we have guests, and we get very excited when we have guests because we get to hear another couple story, which is always such a blessing. And today we get to hear from Shawn and Jayneen, and we've just gotten to know them a little bit, and their story is very unique and very powerful. So thank you so much for coming along with us on this journey.
So, Shawn, what was it like growing up, and how did you meet Jayneen?
Sure. So I grew up in the West Coast. My parents were actually divorced 6 weeks before I was born. So I've never really had a family life with a mom and dad in it. In my 8th grade year, I moved here to Missouri and graduated from school here and went off to Bible college. And even though Jayneen was here in Missouri, we lived about maybe not even a mile and a half from each other. We went to different schools. But when I came back to Missouri area after Bible college, that's when we met shortly after it was a couple of years after I got back.
So your family, how you grew up, what was your opinion or thoughts on what marriage was, since you never really saw it?
Well, I really wanted opposite of what I had. So I really wanted a marriage that would be there together. My mom and dad remained really good friends, but I wanted more than that. I wanted a family and to be together forever. I'd never seen that. So I wanted to have something along those lines.
So for you, Jayneen, what was it like growing up?
I was born a preemie, 4th of July. My birth father was killed in Vietnam a month later. And then my mom remarried in February the following year. And so it was always good for me because I always had a daddy, but they really struggled because she was widowed young and then they lost 3 babies. And so it was very tumultuous. My husband, my brother, we adopted, and he was killed when I was 14. So there was a lot of trauma, but they stuck together. And my grandparents stuck together, and that was just our whole family line of marriages. You just stay together. I don't know that they were always happy, but they all stayed together. And then I went to college, university, and then I transferred and played the transfer game. I don't suggest that. Mm-hmm. And somebody had given me the book Passion and Purity, and that totally changed how I dated. In fact, I didn't date anymore. And then a close friend of ours set us up. It was supposed to come to a Bible study that I had going for singles, but she was really setting us up to meet.
What was the first thing you noticed about Shawn?
I couldn't deter him. I couldn't stop him. I tried. I was pretty bold and blunt. Pretty much told him I didn't want to have anything to do with a guy. I was going to do my teach for 2 years, and then I was going to go teach on the mission field, and I didn't want to have anything to do with a man. And in fact, our first date, he asked me for my phone number, and I told him, I don't need yours. You're welcome.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I said, I have no need for yours. But he got mine.
And called her.
And called me.
Because if I'm thinking about the timeline, is this before texting?
Oh, yeah.
Right,
Yes.
okay, right.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
so just
yeah.
to put it in
Way before
context.
texting.
Yeah.
90s.
So how many times did you have to call her before she would respond?
Actually, it was the next day. So I called her, and Jayneen was not, she was always standoffish, but that's something that I really admired about her. And she gave the attributes of something that I was looking for in a wife, somebody that loved God more than they loved me so they could love me. We were soul winners, and we weren't unequally yoked. We had the same vision and goals. And so that's getting those 3 things are really hard in a spouse, but God provided that. And so it was like, this is what it was worth it.
Yeah. You got everything going for you,
Yes.
so nothing
Yes.
can go
And
wrong.
I wanted to be pursued. I didn't want to do the pursuing.
So looking at that and hearing you even say that, Shawn, that you had a list of your expectation for what marriage would look like, knowing that there was something way below the surface for both of you that you were bringing into marriage, your parents divorcing before you were even born, how did that impact your expectations of like your dating or courtship? What did the courtship look like?
We started dating at Pizza Hut. I was in the ministry and we were going to endeavor to be above board with everything. So we probably should have bought stock in Pizza Hut, but we didn't.
And the only place open.
Oh, that would stay open. And it got to the point where all of our dates, they knew they were coming. They had a special corner set up for us. And they knew that they could go ahead and keep cleaning. And when they were ready to leave is when we were done. So that was our courtship for quite a bit of time. And then we just kind of knew that was the direction that we were heading. And so we talked a little bit about it and then kept dating. I did meet her parents on Easter and her family. And so I got to meet her grandparents and whole bunch of other family members at that time. And I remember we kind of discussed it and I wanted to tell her that I loved her. And she goes, I can't tell you that I love you.
Yeah, I believed you shouldn't tell a man you love him until you're ready to marry them. And so I really like him and I love how he trusts God. God, is this the man for me? Am I in love? I mean, I knew I had all the feelings and, the butterflies, but was it enough to be strong? And one of the teachers had a Focus on the Family magazine on her desk, and it said, How to Know You're in Love. And basically, it walked me through love is a choice. And, it just asked the same questions. And then my mom had always said, if you can't picture yourself cleaning up after them, if they're sick, you better not marry them. So
I think that's fair.
Very fair.
And so I had to, I took all that in, and I knew that night that it was like, he's the one.
So how long from that point till marriage?
So it was literally right underneath a year, but we live in a small town. And so in a small town, and I don't keep secrets, but in a small town, if you say something in one town, it's to the other end before you get there. And so we weren't really going to rush getting married. We were going to continue to date. But I had told 2 people at church, and those 2 people had told quite a few people. So I knew I needed to get permission from her dad right away. So we did that. So it was literally 10 days shy of 1 year from our first date until we got married.
And this is your stepdad, but you still consider he was still the father
Yes,
figure.
he actually adopted me.
He was. Okay.
When you say you were thinking or you wanted to tell her you loved her, how long into dating was that?
Oh, that was probably like 3 months. And I know for me, like I was at the office at church one time, and I was just sitting in my office doing stuff, planning for kids' church, and I just remember on the inside going like, "Are you ready?" And I knew what God was talking about, and I said, "Well, absolutely." And it's like within a week you'll meet her, and so I kind of went into that maybe just knowing that, but not really knowing like, did I really hear God correctly or whatever. But that has still spoken volumes to me all these years, and especially things that we went through, that He really did lead me to that. And so after I met her, again, not knowing what real love was like, because I'd never, I'd seen it from a distance. I was maybe acquainted with the people at church, but never like living in somebody's home. So I was nervous about it, but I felt like I was ready to say those words to her. And especially how she told me, she goes, love is a decision. It's not a feeling. So I don't want a feeling from you. I want you to know that when you tell me that you love me, that it's a decision. And kind of like what she talked about, her mom saying, will you take care of them? And it's like, well, yeah, I can do that. I was ready for love, if I can say it like that. And so it was probably not even 3 months before we said that. But again, we weren't going to get engaged and maybe wait a while longer, to kind of develop that. But living in a small community, word got out.
So you're doing things the right way, perhaps, pursuing, being intentional. You have similar goals. You both know that real love is this way. You get married. What was the first time you realized you were not quite ready? You didn't have the love you needed to have.
We hadn't been married like a month or two, and we realized how selfish we were, which we both thought we were. We are not selfish people. We're not. And then we realized we are so selfish.
And our goal was to have kids right away. I was 23, and you never tell a woman's age. So she was, I don't remember.
I was a little bit older.
Yeah, a little bit older, but
25.
But we wanted children really bad. And so we immediately, after we got back home from our honeymoon, we're going to get pregnant. And we named all of our 4 kids that we wanted. We had it all planned out. And then it just, month after month, you would see the grief that Jayneen would go through, and sometimes she'd be late and sometimes she wouldn't be, and then you take the pregnancy test and stuff. So that was like within the first year of our marriage. And I think there was some other things too. We came from some different backgrounds, and not just family, but ministry wise, and different things like that. So there was some meshing together there. But I think those things, looking back now, I didn't think it at the time, but I didn't place the correct value on Jayneen's opinion in ministry because I came from a different Bible college. And so I didn't know that knowingly. I didn't know I was doing that. But every time she would offer up an opinion or something, I'd be like, yeah, but it's this. Like, I've got more experience you know, in that. And so that really, that first year, you know, going for having kids, establishing new in ministry, but coming to dead ends like all the time was really, really difficult. But we had made that decision that love's a decision, not a feeling. And so you would just kind of like push through that and ignore it, you know, and just go to the next one and go to next month and the next service or things of that sort.
Mm-hmm. So Jayneen, you know, growing up, did you have any idea that you'd have problems with fertility? Anything that was a complete surprise for you? Or
It really was.
Okay.
Although we had talked, even before we got married, we tried to think of all the horrible things that could happen. And we had talked about it, and we're like, well, even if we have our own children, we do want to adopt. My brother was adopted. My daddy adopted me. So that was really strong in my heart. And so it was just something we both decided we wanted to do. But no, the infertility was not expected.
And after 4 years, to find out that I was the reason was really difficult because I knew how much she wanted children. I did too. But it was kind of like, oh, I can't believe I did this to you. And if I had known that before, I would probably not have gotten married. But that was kind of a hard pill to swallow. But Jayneen was so good about like, it'll be fine. It could be me. And
Well, it could be. We stopped when we found out it was him. There was no point in doing more tests. But we tried quite a bit.
4 years of month after month after month of trying and, you know, doing everything everybody told you, buy a new house, get a car, talk
Adopt
about
kids.
adopting,
No.
you know, doing all of those things. And about after 4 years of month after month and seeing the grief coming through her and having to deal with those things each month and the heartbreak that she would go through. And I'm always like, let's go after it again. We'll be okay this time, you know. And
Do you feel like you handled that grief the same then?
No, we didn't.
No.
I don't think we did grieve the same way.
Did you feel like he understood where you were at?
I don't think so. Of course, when we first started, we didn't know. You know, it took us 4 years to find out what the problem was. And in the midst of that, we actually started the process of adopting 2 children. We didn't know that we were infertile at the time. We just were like, oh, well, they kind of got thrown in our house, and we started taking care of them and was like, okay, that's what we have to do.
How did that impact your relationship with God?
I started allowing a seed of bitterness enter into my heart. And I think that caused a lot of issues. Well, I know it caused a lot of issues, health issues, mental issues, my relationship with Shawn. Bitterness will destroy you. And I was slowly killing myself.
Did you see that in her, Shawn?
Oh, absolutely.
How did that affect?
I refused to give up hope. I would grieve with her to the best of my ability, but then be engulfed in business and ministry so that you didn't have to be around the grief. And then we started the adoption process. That took longer than was supposed. It was almost 4.5 years, and it was rejection after rejection. So now we have 8 years of massive rejection, and I ignored the situation, and we just act like it wasn't really there again. I was a master at pushing all my feelings down, and probably the hardest part for me is we really withdrew in our relationship, physically, emotionally, sexually, the whole thing. It was just, you were 2 separate people, but we hung on to that. We made a decision to love, and we will, no matter what, get through this. That was like a long period of loneliness.
And we knew how to put on a good face. I think it surprised many people
Yeah.
when they found out how broken we were.
So, Jayneen, for you, at what point did that bitterness build up to a breaking point?
Oh, my. It was a long journey. Probably, was it 15 years
Yeah.
that it built up?
It was about the year 13 that stuff started happening, but we separated was 15 years.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was about 15 years. At that time, I'd gone through probably 10 surgeries on top of the
parenting and
parenting, the marriage. It all started when I was 30, and they were all different, but I fell down a flight of stairs, back, neck, gallbladder, appendix, female issues. Life just kept getting worse and worse, and I kept getting angrier and angrier. And we had these children that I love with all my heart, but they had so many issues. I couldn't love them or teach them enough to make them behave. I couldn't get the anger out of them, and it built up the anger in me even more.
Because at this point, those kids are how old?
12 and 14.
Yeah.
Those are tough years.
And Shawn's not the disciplinarian in the family. It was me. And so he was fun, and they loved him. And I was the mean one, and that made me angry. So it's like any button that could be pushed made me angry. My last surgery, well, not my last surgery, but the surgery before everything blew up, I was in a coma for 3 days. And they had me on very strong medications. I had a feeding tube. I had to use a walker, barely walk. It was really, really tough. I had to be away from my family for over a month, and all that built up. And I know I wasn't thinking 100% clearly, but I remember getting mad, and I'm like, I'm just going to do the worst thing I can think. And I started reading erotica, which led to texting other men, and that eventually led to meeting other men. So I was having emotional affairs left and right. I had just been so angry. I'm like, God, I have done everything right. I waited for my husband. We've adopted kids. I mean, we've been in the ministry. I mean, I've been in the ministry since I was 9 years old. And how can you do all this to me? I mean, my family's a mess. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to do the worst thing I could. I was angry with Shawn because he wasn't always there. And well, I told him, your church is your mistress. And it led to the point where he saw the stuff on the phone and he confronted me. And I said, I won't do it again. And I did it again. And he found out again. And then he confronted me and said, you need to leave. I'm like, well, I haven't committed adultery, not physically, but I will. And I did. And I was gone for 5 years. Got into some very, very bad stuff.
Did it numb the pain? Did it make the bitterness go away?
No, I was still bitter, but I learned to have fun, which is weird. I had lost how to have fun in all that stuff. And in the midst of the sin, I was with people that I would have never hung out with. I learned to love people that are unlovable. And I guess when we get to the point where I came back, that's when my eyes opened up. God used what I was intended for wrong to show me unconditional love.
So during this 5 years, Shawn, what was life like for you?
She made you sound so angelic
Yeah.
in your response. Was it that
No,
calm?
no. And any broken marriage, there's always two, one that's open and the other one that's not. I could go through my long list of things that I've messed up. I messed up our finances. I ruined a business. I always had fun with the kids, never disciplined. I put ministry above family, and I didn't always talk correctly to Jayneen. You know, there was a point in our marriage where she came to me and she said, we've got to move. I'm about ready to break, and if I break, I will really break. And then 4 years later, she did. But I didn't listen to her. I said earlier that I didn't value her opinion. I didn't know I was doing that. It's not like I'm not going to value Jayneen tonight. But there were a lot of issues there, and I was not angelic in any way. I think, too, that we sometimes see sins that you can see them, then you go like, that's just as bad. But if you can hide it really good and nobody knows about it, then nobody knows about that part. And I think during that 5 years, one of the hardest things that I found was all I asked Jayneen to do was to make it right with Christ. I said, if you just make it right with God, you can come on back. And I'm thinking, man, she loves me so much. You know how quick and easy that's going to be because I'm so valuable. And in that time, I realized that God won't override somebody's will. And so began to realize that when you're believing for a spouse or something along those lines, or even for yourself, you have to be willing. That 5-year journey was intense, but it is a time that I really got to know God on a personal level. And I'm not talking about from the ministry aspect. God loved me for me. And I went from planning for the future to where God really made a relationship with, I need to know him day by day. Things that would come up every single day. Loneliness. And, I'd cry every single night. But I also had to take care of my daughters, too. I took a season out of ministry.
I'm seeing a little bit of a parallel here, this idea of like the years that you were waiting month after month. Maybe this will be the month we get pregnant. In some ways, you're in that same season going, maybe this will be the month that she turns it around.
Yes.
And you're having to do the waiting. And did you still have that same hope? Like, that's still like, okay, if I just keep waiting, it'll happen?
Thank you for saying that, because that's exactly what it was like. And when it didn't happen the way that I thought it would happen, I started losing hope. I was too broken to go forward, and I didn't want to go forward just because, but that is true. I never looked at it quite like that. But yeah, that was an opportunity that God could prove himself daily, and I had to learn how to lean into him to get that.
Well, and even the idea, like with infertility, there was no guarantee that she was coming back.
Yes.
So it was like really, really waiting on God.
It crossed my mind, like, would she possibly meet somebody else and get pregnant and have what we always wanted? And that would make it more difficult.
So as you're walking down this road, Jayneen, what brought you back to God? What was it that opened your eyes to bring you back toward God?
Well, Shawn called and told me that my youngest needed me, even if he had to leave the house. So I came home. He lived on one side of the house. I lived on the other. I think we tried dating a couple times. It was like
Going on a date with your sister.
Yeah, it was really bad.
Most
It was
uncomfortable
really
dates
bad.
I've
It
ever
was.
been on.
I was not going to church. I didn't want to have anything to do with God. I was still angry. Then we discussed that we were like, this isn't working. We're going to have to get divorced. And I said, well, we're going to go to Hope Restored just so we can say we checked off the box and it's done.
Right before she came home, I had determined two things I would never do. I wouldn't make a decision when I was angry, and I wouldn't make a decision that I couldn't live with for the rest of my life. But I'd made the decision that I could be okay to divorce. It'd been 5 years. And I was just like, okay, I could possibly live with this. And I wasn't ready to go on. I didn't want my kids to have another mother. Dr. Dobson, in his book, Love Must Be Tough, says it's unfair to, I'm just Shawn paraphrasing, it's unfair to go forward if you haven't let go of what's behind. I had not given up Jayneen. I knew the real Jayneen was in there somewhere. And I knew at some point in her life that she would come back to him.
In that season, was there any apology or any attempt to actually, okay, let's just skip all that messy stuff and
Yes,
pretend we're okay?
I didn't apologize.
Well,
Did
and
you
it-
ever want an apology or any kind of?
Oh yes, and Jayneen. So one of the things that I love about my wife is she is solid and stubborn. And that's one of her great traits. So in our married life, I didn't keep tally of how many times she said she was sorry. I say sorry too many times. And so I really wanted an apology for what she had put me through, let alone herself and our kids and everything else. So I was looking for that. But the time when she came home, I knew our daughter needed her mom. And I just, at that point, it was like, seeing the joy in our daughter's life that her mom was home overrode some of those things. Still very awkward living at separate ends of the house, but I was hopeful that our relationship would be restored. Again, we didn't see eye to eye. She didn't want to counsel close by because I'm in the ministry. I know a lot of people, and she's like, we have to go somewhere else. And I'm like, we're not going anywhere else. And that's when we discovered Hope Restored. And that's when we just said, okay, well, these are people that don't have any clue who we are.
Because you had said, you can come back to me, I have to make it right with God. And it was pretty clear when she came back.
Yes.
That hadn't happened yet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, not at all. Yeah, not at all.
At what point did you make it right with God?
My cousin invited me to a conference that she'd invited me to before. I didn't want to go. I don't even know why I said yes. I knew it was going to happen there. I knew it was a Christian event, but I said I'd go. And the first day, it was horrible. I hated it. They asked us that night, what are you getting out of this? And I said, it's thought-provoking, is all I would say. I was pretty angry. And the next day, I started crying during worship. Tears just kept building up. And so I'm like, fine, I'll go forward. I was wanting something big, like a thunderbolt or anything. And I'm like, he's not going to do anything. He really doesn't care. If he cared, he'd do something. He just let me feel the way I've always felt. And a still small voice, I heard, Jayneen, I've always loved you. I really lost it then, and the rest of the weekend was fabulous. I didn't know, but they send out things to your family to have them meet you when you get home. And when I showed up, my parents were there, and my daughters were there, and my husband was there. There we had balloons and flowers, and I was so distanced from him. Anytime I saw him first, I'd always go to my kids, and I went right to him, and I kneeled down, and I said, can you forgive me? And lost it.
That's where that apology came that you had asked about earlier. And I knelt down and picked her up and said, will you forgive me? And literally in that embrace and those two words, God restored a marriage, or the beginning of a restoration of a marriage, because it was based out of forgiveness and really a genuine sorrow from both.
There was no doubt that this
No.
was not
Yeah.
No, it
manipulation or
yeah.
anything. You just saw it in her eyes.
Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah.
And you mentioned like the real Jayneen.
Yes, and that was what I was looking for. And I think God first always calls us to peace. And I think about when the disciples were in the boat with Jesus and he's sound asleep, and it's like, where are you, God? Where were you when Jayneen was doing all of these things? And Jesus gets up and he rebukes the storm. And right afterwards, I just read it the other day and I saw it again, then calm set in. And so I always believe that God calls us to peace first. And if you're not in a safe situation or in a place, and that's why I asked her to leave, our relationship wasn't safe. And it was a desire of my heart to get my wife back. And there's no guilt, no condemnation for people that have divorced and gone on. I knew Jayneen, and I just knew at some point that would happen.
How long between your women's conference and then you have already signed up for Hope Restored? What was
One
the timeline?
week.
1 week.
One
So your
week.
heart was ripe then.
Yes.
And it's cool that you had literally a crisis team almost
Oh, yeah.
ready.
Right.
To
In
help
fact, we
navigate that.
went to the marriage retreat, and all the others were like sitting way far apart. And Shawn and I were sitting close, and they're like,
Holding
how many
hands.
are excited to be here? And I'm
We're
like,
like,
we are. We want to learn how to get this right.
Well, and you recognized your own need for help.
Yes.
That's the difference. Like, it wasn't like an unfair hope, but like, we know how much we need help.
Yes.
And that's the
Yes.
best student. Right?
You know, and a lot of times they'll get to a point of restoration like forgiveness, and you can really see God work in that. And he really restored in that moment. But then I think he expects us to put in discipline after that. And I'm not talking about bad stuff. I'm talking like Hope Restored then took this like passionate love and just this like we're in this wonderful place, and that feeling did go away, but we had discipline and then tools for communication that we're 8 years on the other side of restoration. My numbers might be off, it might be 7, but we are in a much better place because we know how to communicate with each other now.
Yes.
And we never communicated before.
I think a couple of things you said that really stood out. Forgiveness. I really believe forgiveness is a key ingredient to the healing process.
Mm-hmm.
But I also believe it's a healing process. And a weekend event is awesome like that. But it's the process afterwards that really sets forth the change. What was the hardest thing for you to implement as far as change goes?
Learning to communicate. So again, this kind of goes back to some of our foundational things, like where I went to Bible college and where she went to Bible college. I never gave myself permission to speak how I feel. And growing up as a middle child in an abusive, you learn to keep your mouth shut, to not get in pain or to talk about things. And Jayneen's like stick of dynamite. She'll tell you just like, this is the way it is. And it's like, whoa. And that's what I love about her. I don't mean that in a bad way. But I had to learn how to go ahead and tell her how I feel. And this is where our relationship's very unique is I'll use 1,000 words in 2 seconds, and Jayneen might use 40 words in a day, if I can get that many out of her. And she would just say, could you please just get to the point? And I'm like, that's so hard. But God gave me her back. And so I had to learn how to get to the point.
Tara's laughing because it's exactly the opposite for us.
Yes.
Was there a point in your healing process where you had to unpack those years of separation? How hard was that conversation? How much do you share and not share? And how does it even look if someone is trying to unpack a very traumatic event in their marriage?
I think we unpacked it slowly.
Yeah, very slowly.
In fact, I think there's still things that come up. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about how far we'd come. And I'm like, I can't believe how much like Hosea you were to me. And then I think I told you something that I had not told him, not because I didn't want to tell him. There was a lot.
Yeah.
But he heard me, didn't get angry. And he said, did you feel like this? So I knew he heard what I was saying. And being heard helps everything. Then I was able to hear him. He told me how difficult at that point.
Yeah.
So just hearing each other's feelings without blaming one another.
And we still don't do this alone. So we still go back to Hope Restored has a weekend getaways for marriage. That's what we treat our anniversary every year. We go there. We still have the ugliest picture. We have 2 of them now. That's a roadmap to communication. And those are what's in our front room because that's where we
Yes.
spend the most amount of time. And I can see what pushes Jayneen's buttons and she can see what pushes mine. If I see her reacting a certain way, I don't get mad at the reaction or the feeling. I get to the heart. What is the root cause of what's causing you to be like that? And, for Jayneen, safety was one of those things. What I did in our family didn't create safety. So now I endeavor to be at the top of our finances. I endeavor to make sure that the house bill is paid for, the electric bill is paid for, not like, oh, it'll come in, don't worry about it, we'll have it by the rest of the month, but taking care of those things. Jayneen feels the richest when our pantry is the fullest. And all I have to do to make her feel rich is go like, let's go grocery shopping, love. And we fill up the pantry. We may not need it, but we got stuff that's still in there. But just this peace is over her because her pantry's full. She's safe and she's doing those things. Well, that's work that I can do that's easy to do because I know it makes it well for her, and then vice versa. But I said all of that to say this is that we still have people in place to keep us accountable.
Yes.
We still aren't doing this alone. Unpacking is miserable by yourself. And so you've got to do that. We've got each other. We're a team again. And then we put boundaries into place in our marriage and our life that requires others. And I wouldn't recommend anybody trying to restore their marriage without help. And most people, that's what they don't want. But help is actually one of the greatest things. We refused it for 15 years. And now we won't ever do that again. We refuse to go back to the lack of communication, so much to the point that, like, and I'm nostalgic, and I'm like, honey, let's go on March 17th. Let's go to Pizza Hut. That was our first date. You wore this, and we had Diet Coke, and all of these things. And she's like, no, we're new. Somebody said this to me: your marriage will never be what it was before.
No.
If you expect it to be what it was before, you'll end up with the same results almost. So this was brand new, still the same Jayneen, still the same Shawn, but in a restorative place, and we don't do marriage like we used to do, and we don't let things roll. We also know that we have the rest of our married life to work on things. Mm-hmm. And there are things that we still can't. We call it heart-to-heart talk, but we have heart talk, and we can't get to some of those areas, but we're winning. We're getting as many wins that we can get in our bucket, if I can say it, so that we can then, once in a while, something will come up, and you'll come from a place of like, hey, we just had 15 wins over the last 2 months. Mm-hmm. This one's going to be really hard. The other thing that I learned we do too is I'm not responsible for how she feels.
Right.
God called 2 whole people into a marriage. I'm responsible for taking care of how I feel. Mm-hmm. When Jayneen tells me, honey, when you do this, it makes me feel like this, that's her real feeling. God gave us feelings to kind of be like, oh, when you can, it has that little thing on top, and
the pressure cooker.
Yeah, the pressure cooker, things like that. Your feelings are that little vent, and it's okay if she feels angry when I do something. What her anger is that's just like that little thing going off on the pressure cooker. I need to find out why she's angry.
So I have a question regarding the feelings and the anger. So you obviously had very obvious bitterness and anger. You were suppressing some things she rightfully could have made you angry. So in the healing process, was there a point at which you had to say, I'm really angry, like at a healthy way? That's a healthy anger?
Yes,
I don't know how you do that. But
absolutely. So, and I think I'm going to go back to this. I think the one thing that I found in those 5 years, and even to this point, is I was not able to fix Jayneen. And trust me, I tried in some things, and Jayneen wasn't able to fix me in things. But the one person that could be fixed was me. And so I began a process of just taking it day by day. I am very quick to forgive. Literally, I go back to the day that she left. I asked her to leave, and that was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life, because it was like, but I love you. I don't want you to go, but I had to ask her to leave. That moment, I knelt at my bed just weeping, because I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I forgave her at that moment. And every time that I would find something, and listen, in 5 years, you find a lot of things, I would get angry, I would cry, and then I would forgive. And sometimes I forgave immediately, and I would still go through those processes. But I think in those 5 years, I had to deal with abandonment and anger and loss, and dreams totally crashed. I'm going to be just like my family was. I had to deal with all of those things, and then I had to become okay with if that was going to be the outcome of it. And so I think I worked in it in a daily process. So when we did get restored, we kind of came from a whole different place. You heard her say earlier that she discovered a thing about loving people just where they were at. And Jayneen never did that. She would immediately judge right off the top and do things like that. And so I began to learn how to deal with some of those feelings that I never gave voice to. And then in a healthy way. I endeavored to do it in a healthy way. And then at Hope Restored, they taught us how to do that. I'm responsible of how I come to her. But then, if she's mad or sad, usually she's not mad, but it's usually sad or unsafe. And like the other night, we just had a discussion about this, and she came to me and she goes, do you want fame? And it's like, no, honey. In fact, I said, and I went through the story about how it just kind of unfolded. And I said, that I'm an extremist in areas like, I'll think the worst of everything. Like a storm's coming, like, oh my goodness, the roof's going to go off the house. But I'm the same way on the other side. I said, if one couple could maybe not have to go through what we did and start learning to communicate now, and be willing to talk to each other and learn tools that are available. And your guys' podcast is one of those that are real tools that if you put into practice, and they are so hard, but the thing is practice. As we've listened to your podcast, there are real genuine things that you say to do. And on the opposite side of listening to you is like, that was just really sweet. But then it's like, we're going to put it into practice. And these things work. but it doesn't work the first time, and it doesn't work the second time, and it doesn't work the 10th time. And on the 11th time, you might get some of those things that you're working through, like you guys were talking about where your shoes were at. After about 2 years of finally picking my shoes up, and I just realized, oh, wait a minute, I can really do this. But it's practice. And if you don't, and that's what we did 15 years of no practice. We did what we thought was best. Yeah. And that's where we ended up. But we practice going through things. And like I said, the other day we were talking about this, and I realized, I looked at my chart.
Well,
do you want to tell him that? Can I grab a chart?
He was very excited, which he is very easily excited.
Well, he just ran out of the studio, so yes.
Yes, he's very excited. Awesome. Bye. He'll be back in about 30 minutes.
Ice cream truck? Or we'll take a picture of this and share it if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was just feeling that, like, I just don't feel this is comfortable. I'm like, if he's doing this for glory, I don't want to open my heart up just for fame and glory. That doesn't mean anything to me. And so I went to him. I said, Shawn, can I talk to you?
Can I have a heart talk?
Can I have a heart talk? Which is what we call it. And he was like, yes. And I said, when you are saying this, I feel like you're wanting it for fame and glory. And I'm afraid to open my heart for that.
And she really didn't say those words. I mean, what she's telling you is what we got to afterwards.
Yes.
I looked in her face and realized that a button had been pushed. And I leaned over to this picture, which is in our front room, and I said, wait a minute. One of your buttons is intimacy, and it was just pushed. Our story is a very intimate story. It's not just something you go and it's like, hey, this is what happened to us all. And then I realized that she almost felt disappointed because I was so free to be intimate about what God's done in our life, and that's a reserve for her. And when I looked at her and I said, honey, I said, because of those two things, and she really wants intimacy, and then she wants to know that it's going to be genuine and real, and it's useful. And so when I was able to get to what the problem was, then we were able to talk about it. And then I was able to really share my heart that it wasn't to just be on a podcast. It was to, we both know that God's done something in our lives. And we just, if, like I said, if, and this is Janene's real big, if one, and I'm like, well, if 10,000, but you know, Janene's like, but if one, and I was able to say those words back to you. I hear you saying, you know, that what I wanted was this, and that really bothered you with maybe touching on the level of intimacy, that our story is intimate, and here I want to just broadcast it, and that maybe there was some disappointment that I wasn't willing to protect you. And she's like, yes, that's exactly what I was feeling, not what I really was doing. That's okay to feel that way. And when she knew that I heard her and understood her feelings, her whole demeanor changed. And what she just told you a moment ago is what she came to the conclusion of, well, then let's go for it.
That's high-level relational skills that you don't get by accident or by luck. Like, that's practice, because Joe and I have had the same kind of things. Easy. Like, it's the smallest little thing. Like, I'm doubting your intention. I'm doubting this. And it's a creep of a doubt. And if you don't address it, then suddenly this changes and you look at this differently in your whole lens versus just coming out and saying, can I tell you kind of what I'm worried about or concerned about? And I think you're exactly right. Sharing your story is such a vulnerable thing. And for her to say, do you recognize that?
Yeah.
That's huge.
I think also trust has to be there for you to be vulnerable to say, this is what's bothering me.
Yes.
You needed him to really listen and to be able to engage with you on that level that you could trust him. And that's where you were saying earlier, Shawn, that it may be the 11th time or it may be the 50th time when trust has been broken or when lack of communication has hurt the relationship. So many times as couples, they give up right as breakthrough is about to happen.
Yes.
They just hung in there a little bit longer. And that trust is restored. And then all of a sudden you start to see that breakthrough. What's really cool is that this wasn't something that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. You were able to address that and get that taken care of pretty quickly.
Right.
And I also feel like if she would have said, I still don't feel comfortable with it, you would have been okay with that.
You know, my exact words to her were, honey, your intimacy and your me not feeling fake and you're useful, you know, feeling this is useful and your piece is so far more important to me that I'll call first thing in the morning and suspend this until you are. And see, that 8 years ago, that would have been a fight. You don't understand. You're going to ruin this again. You know, why are you, you know, that would have been what it was. But I care so much about what God has given me back that I will stop whatever I need to.
Isn't that interesting, though? I love that on so many levels because 15 years ago, it would have been, look what God's doing. We can't pass this up because look what God,
Exactly.
God brought this opportunity.
Yes.
What are we doing?
The most important thing is ministry.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Where now ministry is important, but the person that God wants you to learn to love is more important than what we do over here.
Yes.
We get this right first, and then ministry follows that.
And your first ministry that God's ever invented was family. And that's what we have to do as family.
So besides, restoring your marriage, it really wasn't about restoring your marriage. In the end, it really was each of you had to be restored in your relationship with God.
Yes.
So what did that look like as you each kind of got your own individual walks together?
Yeah. For me, I had an incident happen when I was 9 that made me get into works because I didn't think God could really forgive me. Even though I knew what the Bible said, I became the goody two-shoes and I did everything right. But I looked down on people. I was very, very, very stuck up. And I really got into works and not the relationship. And once God told me he loved me, that started that relationship with him. That started healing me. And I continue to be healed daily from hurts and things. We live in a fallen world. We're going to get hurt. I know I can go to him when I'm disappointed. I know I can go to him when I'm scared. And I was able to see that. God used my husband to show me unconditional love that I never felt. And that's God's love towards us. And I was finally able to embrace God's real love. He is a living God. He cares about me so much. If I start to get mad, I can go to him and say, God, I'm mad at this. I stubbed my toe at 3 a.m. And he cares.
How did it feel when that bitterness was officially, I'm looking at you going, that pain, the weight of bitterness must be so incredibly light.
I feel so light. I feel truly joyful. Even bad days, I still feel joyful. It's the joy of the Lord, not ooh, I'm happy, Ray.
Did you feel almost like you and God had a reckoning in terms of the hurts that you had to say, I release those things that I was holding you responsible for?
Yes. I was like, wow, I can't believe the audacity I had to be angry over a fallen world. Because everything that happened to me that made me angry was because of a fallen world. It was because of sin in this world. It had nothing to do with God. He didn't want me to go through that.
He gave us a free will.
Yes.
And so you can't give a free will and then restrict the behavior, if
Exactly.
you will. But I do think that there are times, looking back over my own story, there are times where I believe God said, no here or no there.
Yes.
And I'm really grateful for that. But as Christians, it's not that we're going to have a perfect world without hurt. It's that we're going to have someone to walk through that hurt with.
Yes.
And like you said before, when you stub your toe, someone who has an understanding of the hurt that you're going through, someone who's empathetic and is there with us to carry us through that season or seasons. Shawn, what did that look like for you?
There was a statement Jayneen made right before she left, and she said, you failed to be my knight in shining armor. And I've always dealt with, I'm not built, I don't hunt, I don't fish, I'm not a man, like those types of things. And when she said those words, those went to the core. During our separation period, that's when God began to deal with that. So I remember taking that statement one time and going fine, I'm going to be a man this week. And I acted like that for a week. It was the worst week of my life. And then right afterward, that's where God began to show, I made you nostalgic. I made you sensitive. I made you like this. I made you to where you don't care about hunting and fishing, and I made you this way. And so he began to work on me, how I needed to deal with it. I think I said it earlier, but that feeling is okay. You just don't live there. It's okay to recognize that I'm a work in progress as well. And so walking through that journey and realizing that he began to work on me, and it was an individual thing. God was more concerned about going after me than he was this marriage. Mm-hmm. And he kept pursuing me. And where I was lacking in pursuit and missing these things and missing relationship, God's like, I want to be the one that fills you each and every day. Yes. When you're lonely, I want you there. I was grieving one time, and I remember the Lord said to me, he said, ask me to fill the void that Jayneen created when she left. And I said, I can't ask you that. I argued with God. I said, I can't ask you that. I asked her to leave. And he goes, that is not what I said. And I literally knelt at the foot of the bed, said those words, and God's presence filled that void from when she left. And it just kept going. It would be thing after thing after thing where my full dependence became upon him and my daily dependence. And I said this earlier that right before we got back together, that I was okay to divorce. And I know this sounds cold. It really is not cold, I promise you. I learned to do life without Jayneen, and I know how to do life with Jayneen. I can do it with or without her. And I want to do life with her because it's so much better. I know that God's the one that gives me what I need. And I'm not saying that that's marriage is about, honey, I need this, and we need to do this, and let's go on vacation together, and let's go fill the pantry together, with groceries, or how are we going to deal with the kids on this one now, and all of those things. But I have a partner that is whole and complete and gets her fullness from Christ. I'm whole and complete. And then we come to this place together invited. I'm not forcing it in her, and vice versa. And so God taught me to do that. And he taught me how to learn how to deal with a stick of dynamite, how to love stubbornness, and how to never give up, and how to be able to look beyond what I can see. And I'm not talking about her appearance, but look beyond what I can see in reactions or where we're at. And I think for me, the roles were reversed in some of these things. Like I used to always think about everything ahead of time. And now I endeavor to live day by day. And Jayneen was a lot like that. And now Jayneen really sees things that are ahead. And so God took what the devil meant for complete destruction in our life and really flipped it around for the good. And I know she loves me, and I love her, but I love doing life with her. And so I think God taught me that in that process, that it's day by day, it's about him. And the knight in shining armor that I mentioned earlier looks different, but I'm her knight in shining armor now, if I could say it like that.
He's my Hosea. He's better than a knight in shining armor. He's my Hosea.
If we're Christians and we are going to live our life by the word of God, then when we start to look at what forgiveness is really, really like, and Jayneen mentioned Hosea, it is now my favorite book of the Bible. I kept going back to, because I would be like, you did this not once, I started taking the list, making a list of all of these things. But when you go back to Hosea, it's like God asked him to do that 3 times. And it's like, oh.
A lot of times when an affair happens, what makes it so difficult is that one person feels as though the other person owes them something, and then the other person feels like they can never quite repay. How did you guys work through that to find true healing?
I remember one time going like, I can't get back with her. She's been with people, and that was one of the things I never wanted to go through. And this is going to sound harsh, but I don't mean it to come across that way. But I remember the Lord saying, because of your age, the likelihood of you getting married to a virgin who's never been with somebody else is very rare. And then he said, then you're expecting something of a woman that you've been with, so if you can renew your heart to do that in a new marriage, can you afford her that same opportunity? And it was fearful. I was afraid of comparison. I was afraid of what might have happened in those areas. But every time I was faced with fear, I would go back to, I forgive. And when you practice forgiveness, it really does work. And then we have a lot of accountability measures in place. There are fear buttons that Jayneen will push occasionally that'll make me go like, or I might see something or remember something that triggers those things. But we really communicate about it. I don't just go like, I'm going to ignore that, because that was the reason why some of the stuff happened, is I ignored the problems and I didn't address it. And so we make sure, like, if I feel that way, I'm talking to her about it.
Yes.
So you have like an open dialogue. If we start to have old feelings or old wounds pop up, because even though the forgiveness process is a choice, those feelings still bubble up, and to ignore them versus saying, hey, I'm having trouble exercising forgiveness today, and just kind of put it out there. I feel like squashes it more than pretending, oh yeah, I feel just fine.
And we have to be honest to the point, I don't remember what happened. I don't know if it was a show we were watching or something, but it started bringing up some old feelings that I had. And I told Shawn, I'm struggling with temptation. So we talked about some things, and I quit doing a couple things that were pushing that temptation, but he knew exactly where I was. Was it easy to do? No. Because I know that could hurt him, that I'm thinking of things, but in his life, he had things that would still cause temptation and come up. And so we're just open with each other. I'm afraid you're going to do this. What happened here scares me, or I'm feeling tempted.
And the key word too is feelings. And we've mentioned that a couple times. We don't have a problem with voicing what we feel.
Right.
We don't live there. We talk about it, we communicate about it, and then we put extra measures into place. We said this earlier when we were talking about our marriage. God restored Jayneen overnight in a women's conference, but then we put safety measures. My phone has devices on it that keeps accountability, that sends it to friends of mine that are accountable. We put safety measures in place that enable us to have accountability when we don't want it and when we do want
Yes.
it. And then we've worked on that communication over and over and over and over again, because like I've told her, I don't want to ever go through this again. And if you put into practice safety measures that are not based on feelings, like accountability things and open communication with close people, that'll keep you in check really, really quick. And then because we lived 15 years of hiding everything and not discussing about it, we refuse to go back there.
Yeah. But that takes trust to say, I'm feeling tempted. But it takes practice too.
Well, the enemy would want us to keep that in the dark.
Yes.
Yes.
I appreciate what you shared, because there's an element of coming into a marriage brand new and having trust and figuring out how to maneuver that and being able to share those things, which I think are extremely important. But then there's also rebuilding that trust.
Right.
May I add one other
Yeah.
thing? Safety is a huge issue, and Hope Restored will minister on that too as well. But there's this issue of you've got to be in a safe environment, and if there's no safety, we couldn't have communication.
Right.
We couldn't have relationship. We couldn't have that. So we keep things very safe. And I'm not just talking about accountability. I mean, safety is Jayneen's number one goal on our chart. And so we endeavor as a married couple to make sure that our environment is safe so that we can have communications like that. I didn't freak out when she came to me. My heart sank a little bit. But then the fact that she came to me was like, she trusts me to share this with me. And then it's like, no, we're going after this. And so it was just a simple
prayed.
show. We cut that show right off. It's no longer on the thing
we
like
prayed
that.
and we turned the show off, and it was a show. Thank
but
you.
safety is a huge. You have to have a safe environment, and you think about raising a kid. Think about how you feel safe with your husband.
It took lots of practice. It wasn't overnight. We trust each other, and that safety. We had to know we felt safe to communicate with one another, and that's where Hope Restored helped us.
If somebody says time out, we literally take time out, and we may pick it up the next day. We may pick it up in a few minutes if I can take a deep breath, do those things. But we've racked up a lot of wins.
So our last question should be a little easier.
Yes.
And we'll start with Jayneen. What about your husband makes you smile? Then what?
Oh my gosh. Everything but his rabbit trails. His compassion, his unconditional love to me, his unconditional love to our daughters, and the way he really tries to point our family to Christ.
All right, it's your turn, Shawn.
Well,
Trails.
Jayneen has this beautiful smirk that she makes when she says words. And I saw it on our first date. And even though the surgeries have changed some of that, I still see it. And so her actual smile is what it gets me every time. I'll use the word melts me every time. The fact too that every day that I get to see her, I see her not angry anymore and free. And that makes me smile, because that's the woman that I fell in love with. And God did a work in her. And I just am so thankful for that. But it's her smirk. It really is her smirk and smile that gets me right there. You can't ever see it. But
I appreciate so much for your vulnerability, your willingness to share openly. There's so much to unpack in what you've shared that I think it'll be like a week from now. I'll be like, oh, why didn't I think of that question? Or why didn't I think of that? Because
I want a chart. Like they
yeah.
have
yes.
a little bit of living room art.
They're awesome. It really is.
So we'll put that in the show notes, and I have a feeling there'll be something similar on my living room wall as well. Thank you so much for sharing openly and being here to share. And I know that's not easy, and the things that you walk through and the way that you trust God, I know that's an ongoing process. The healing process is a lifelong process, but really appreciate you sharing so openly today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jayneen.
Thank you.
It's an honor to hear someone's story, and thank you for sharing it with one person or 10,000.
Yes.
I'm grateful either way.
And thank you, Shawn.
Thank you as well.
Behind Our Smiles is a Wow God production, a ministry of the University of Northwestern St. Paul. Discover more at wowgod.com.